So, when did Americans lose their British accents? Hi, I'm Tessa with If Over 50. This is all about my journey moving back to England after growing up in Canada and the US and living there most of my life. What am I finding out? Well, first of all, everybody makes a note of my accent. They're always like, oh, where are you from? I'm always sure what to say when they ask me because I've lived all over. So my accent is probably what would be considered a general American accent. But let's talk about a British accent. So, what actually makes up a British accent? Well, a British accent is how the Queen spoke. I mean, she sounded very upper class and posh. And that accent is also known as received pronunciation or RP, also known as a BBC accent or a public school accent. Now, public schools over here are private, so that denotes that you've had a very good education. So you don't have any regional inflection, you just sound very smart and upper class. And if you don't want anybody to know where you're from, if you're not exactly proud of your where you were brought up, then a RP accent or a BBC accent is a very good way to cover that up and make it sound like you are on the up. So, American accent, on the other hand, as I said, is the way I speak. It's a general accent. It's a newscaster accent, is also known as. There's no regional inflection or influence. However, American accents, just like British accents, can sound very, very different from one coast to the other and top to bottom, right? But this is about how the Americans lost their British accent. Well, you probably didn't know they ever had a British accent. But how do we define, what are the definitions if we really want to drill down and find out what exactly makes one or the other? Well, in general, an American accent is a rhotic accent. Think about the RHOTIC. It means we pronounce our R's. We park the car in the yard. So that's a rhotic accent. A British BBC type accent is non-rhotic because the R is not pronounced. We park the car in the yard. So those are the two main differences. And of course, like I said, there's a lot of others, but that's one way to spot it out. So when did the English start speaking with an English accent? Well, you probably thought they did from day one, but no. So let's go back in time to 1607. The English colonists were settling at Jamestown, Virginia, and at the time, they wouldn't have had a British accent. They probably would have sounded much like their American neighbors. And even up until the late 1700s, and it's kind of hard to tell because they didn't have a way of, recording sound at the time, but up until the late 1700s, during the American Revolution, both British and American soldiers would have spoken with a similar accent. They would have pronounced their R's. But after that, it gets a little messy, just as history can do. So shortly after the American Revolution ended, now we're another 100 years on, and this is about circa 1800, the British upper class in the south of England started speaking with a non-rhotic accent. They changed it up. They started dropping their R's. And this is when the posh or RP accent originated in the 1800s. It was considered regionally neutral and easy to understand. And so it spread throughout England and then throughout the British Empire. The armed forces took it along with them, and then the BBC, which is the voice of the British Empire, sort of spread it out. So it was while the British were starting to speak very posh, their buddies back in America were saying, yeah, I want to sound posh too. So all of those influential port cities up and down the East Coast, like Boston, Savannah, Richmond, they all started speaking with an RP accent because they wanted to show off status as well. Speaking posh had become jolly good. But eventually what the British elite were doing was kind of less important to those living in the Americas. So gradually, received pronunciation kind of lost its status and fizzled out in the US. And soon the prevailing existing accent was dubbed General American and spread through the states, similar to the way RP had taken hold in Britain. So when did the Americans lose their British accents? Well, right up until the 20th century, a large swath of the United States was still speaking with what can be considered a British accent, in other words, not pronouncing their R's. And they wouldn't entirely lose this way of speaking until sometime during the early 1900s. Yeah, as recent as that. Means that essentially we were both speaking American during the 1700s, British during the 1800s, and our accents didn't really start diverging, in any major respect until the early to mid 1900s. Yes, we had a very close linguistic history, just as we have a special relationship. Of course, there are exceptions to American British accents, aren't there? And it's not just about whether or not you pronounce your R's, it's also how you pronounce your T's and your O's. I say tomato, you say tomato. American pronunciation does tend to be a bit flatter, whereas English accents vary up and down, and they're almost musical. But even so, even today, in some parts of the southeast of England and Scotland and Ireland, they pronounce their R's. In other words, they speak almost like an American would. And in some parts of the American southeast in Boston, they don't pronounce their R's, so kind of like a British accent. So that begs the question, is speaking with an RP accent still a mark of status? In fact, it's considered a bit old-fashioned to speak the way the Queen did, and even she kind of moderated her accent throughout her reign. Um, but it's also the same of other regional accents here in Britain. I mean, shout out to the Scousers, the Mancunians, and the Glaswegians. You all have very distinct accents. But even those are becoming softened and mellowed a bit because people are a lot more mobile than they used to be. So is there an RP equivalent to the US? Is there a way of speaking that's considered posh or status conscious in the US? Not really. I mean, in their day, the Kennedys popularized a particular kind of New England RP, the ka and the Harvard yard. And at the time, that actually, a lot of people probably would have liked to emulate that. And they still speak that way a little bit in Boston, but not because they're trying to sound posh. It's just the way they speak. So I think if you speak well and you have a good command of the English language in the US, that will open a lot of doors for you. It's all about the money, honey, when it comes to the US, not about status. So I found another little article, the most well-liked in the world, and I'm not surprised at that. I mean, Mary Poppins and James Bond, as diverse as they are from each other, they both are very uniquely British, and they have just such a wonderful command of the English language and the way they speak. I think we all love them. I mean, we'll probably always judge somebody by how they speak, their accent, but hopefully we'll also consider what they're saying over how they say it. So there you go. There's the story of how Americans lost their English accent and how the English got theirs. I hope you found that informative. I really appreciate you watching my videos. And of course, if you have any comments, put them below. And I will see you soon on the next video. Bye for now.